We're also talking about this rather compelling article that I read last night, actually. And you know when something just pops up in your Twitter feed? And I found myself reading this for ages. It's a very, very long essay, and it is entitled Islamic Homophobia is Empowered by Leftist Silence. And the author of that article, Jimmy Bangash, who's the spokesperson for the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain, joins me now live via video link. Evening to you, Jimmy.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thanks for taking the time to talk to us tonight here on Talk Radio. Firstly, it's quite a brave article to write. I think it's fair to say that a lot of people wouldn't expect someone of the Islamic faith or ex-Islamic faith, which is what I understand you are, wouldn't expect them to write an article like this. What compelled you to put pen to paper and write this?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think probably some of it's about my own journey and the work that I do. So definitely looking at what it was like to grow up as a gay man in a Muslim community, and then all of the horrible things that come along with that, in terms of the beliefs and the treatment from the community that you get for being a gay person. And then working as a psychotherapist, I work with people in the same arena who are individuals who have left Islam, and the treatment that they get as a result of leaving the religion is very similar, actually, for ex-Muslims or gays. There's a similar treatment of shunning, persecution, threats of violence or actual violence as well. So I think that experience, but then coupled with that, when we see in society something happening and we think it's abysmal or abhorrent, we're usually very good at pointing it out and having a conversation around it. So if we see homophobia due to Christianity, for example, there's always a lot of noise around it, and there's a lot of condemnation, and public figures are standing up to call out the abusive behavior. But actually, there's something where when it's Islam that is the root cause of the homophobia, we seem to be silent about it. And I thought it was time that I kind of gathered all of the thoughts that I had around it and put it into an article for someone to publish. Obviously, such an article, because it's critical of Islam, isn't something that's readily taken up, particularly by LGBT publications, which is ironic because it is about homophobia. But I reached out to Queer Majority and they were happy to publish the article. And it really is a compilation of all of the different thoughts that I've been having over the years as working with a spokesperson of Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain, and having spoken at various different events. This was pulling all of the strands together and saying, actually, this is a picture of the situation at hand.
Because you're quite specific in the title that you are seeing it almost as a betrayal. The essay is called Islamic Homophobia is Empowered by Leftist Silence. Now, look, before we go on, I just want to make it clear to anyone listening, we're obviously not saying every single person who is of the Islamic faith is homophobic. Well, I gave an example at the top of the show that we have a London mayor who's clearly fought for rights within the gay community, and I think that should be commended. And I think that's always the big fear when people have these conversations, that it's going to stir up people saying, well, there you go, every single person of the Islamic faith is homophobic. And we'll get to that in just a moment, but you're very specific in saying that it's leftist silence. What do you mean by leftist silence?
Yeah, so I think leftist silence as well as leftist silencing, yeah? So just like you said, we're not talking about every single person of Muslim heritage. And similarly, we're not talking about every single person on the left. There are people who do speak out, against Islamic homophobia, or speak up in response to supporting gay rights. But I can give you some examples which might best illustrate how people are silent around Islamic homophobia, or how they try and silence others whenever we speak about it. So one of the examples would be in 2017, when the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain decided to march in gay pride. And what mobilized us to do that was actually that out of Chechnya at the time, there was a lot of reports coming about gay people being rounded up, put into concentration camps. Some stories were coming out that gay people were being physically brutalized. And even
Chechnya is a majority Muslim country, isn't it?
Yeah, indeed, yeah. And so what we decided to do was actually, let's go to Gay Pride and we'll march in support of all of the LGBT in Chechnya, whether they're Muslim or whether they're ex-Muslim. Yeah, it doesn't matter to us, actually, we're marching for gay rights. But because we're Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain, we wanted to bring attention to something that was a result of Islamic homophobia. So when we marched, we had some, really witty placards, I would say, that were poking fun at Islam and Islamic theology that condemns gay people.
So what did the placard say? Do you remember?
Yeah, so there were quite a few. Some of them were things like less Islam, more orgasms. Others were like FC UK, Islamic homophobia. We're here, we're kafir, things like that. Yeah. And it was really just this idea of being critical of a religion which condemns gay people. And I think the importance of that is not to be understated in terms of its context, because Pride has always been a place where religious homophobia, political homophobia, cultural homophobia has always been challenged. Yeah, so you have people dressing up as nuns, as priests, poking fun at Christian homophobia. And quite close to us was a contingent of marchers who were poking fun at Christian homophobia, and they had signs saying things like Jesus had two dads. Yeah, and then on the day, the police descended on us and told us to put our signs down, and that our signs were offensive, and that we shouldn't be marching with them. And we did highlight to them, well, actually, there's a Christian contingent over there that you don't seem to be giving the same attention to. But yet you're really focusing on us. What is that about? How comes when we're criticizing Islamic homophobia, the police come and try and silence us? But actually when people are criticizing Christian homophobia, the police couldn't be less interested.
Yeah, those people are kind of celebrated because it's hilarious and people feel much more comfortable, don't they, criticizing Christian homophobia or even taking the mickey out of it. But that's quite telling that the police actually came and said to you, those signs are offensive, they will offend people.
Yeah, and I think what you pointed out in terms of this celebration and this laughter, the joyfulness around, ridiculing Christian homophobia, it's important to think and realize that hasn't just manifested out of the blue. So that is through the progression of the various stages that you go through when one blasphemes. So initially when people were ridiculing Christian homophobia, it would have been shocking. It would have been really uncomfortable. It would have been a really difficult conversation. But we know that by not relenting, we've managed to get to a place where actually it's not seen as okay to be homophobic because your religion is Christianity. And I'd argue, as I do in my piece, that actually we don't afford the same level of scrutiny to Islam that we afford to Christian homophobia.
Why do you think that is?
Yeah, good question. So I think some of it's really nobly minded. So I think some of it's really nobly minded. So I think if you're looking at Western countries, so if you're looking at America, if you're looking at the UK, obviously Muslim people make up a minority. Yeah. And also there's this context of Islamophobia, which is a word that gets thrown around a lot. And in that context of there being a religious minority, and the word Islamophobia, there's always the context of racism as well. So I think one thing that people who might support gay rights, who might be on the left, think is actually, if I criticize Islamic homophobia, I'm risking or jeopardizing Muslims. I'm putting them at risk for being seen as disgusting or evil or homophobes or whatever. Yeah. So, and I don't want to do that. I'm not comfortable calling out Islamic homophobia in the way that I can call out Christian homophobia, because I don't want to put people in danger or put them at risk. And I think in a way that's quite nobly minded. It's kind of wanting to protect people. But at the same time, it has some really damaging ramifications, because if those of us on the left don't actually speak out about Islamic homophobia, well, then you just leave a silence. And the people who are going to be speaking out about it, who are going to be talking about it in very loud voices, are going to be people on the far right. They're going to be the ones who are demonizing Muslims as backwards, as barbaric, as the other. And actually, they're the people that will then steer and direct the conversation. So what we need is more reasonable people talking about Islamic homophobia and saying, actually, these ideas, they don't belong in the 21st century. It's not okay to have states that still legislate for execution or imprisonment across the Muslim majority world in the name of Islam to persecute gay people. Reasonable people need to have those conversations without the fear of being called Islamophobes or racists. And if you are, even if you are called an Islamophobe or a racist, you can always just bring it back down to what is the United Nations Declarations of Human Rights. So long as you're championing this idea of what human rights are, regardless of whether you're being called a homophobe or regardless of whether being called an Islamophobe, that is really a solid grounding point to stand upon and say, well, actually, you can call me whatever names you want to call me, just like I get called all kinds of names. But actually, what I'm standing for is human rights, and this is something that has been agreed on an international level.
I think that you raise a really good point, because many times I've tried to talk about this. Look, I'll tell you now, I've got some tweets now already. Sam, an absolute idiot on Twitter, saying, yet again, inciting Islamophobia, this presenter can't help himself with his bigotry and racism. And he's gone on to say that all sorts of things that I've been saying. Well, again, completely ignoring that I've made a very, very concerted effort to point out that I'm not talking about every single person who is Islamic, because unless I've gone around the world and asked every single person who is Muslim what they think of gay people, you cannot make a gross generalization like that. What you can say, though, is within the faith as a whole, there is an issue. That doesn't make every single person responsible. But also, the other disconnect I've seen, aside from just homophobia, is, and again, I think this needs to be stood up to and pointed out, is that, and this is a really sort of controversial ground to go on, I think, but I'm going to say it anyway, whenever there is an horrific attack perpetuated, a terror attack, for instance, by someone from the Islamic community in the name of Islam, it's very important, and I agree it's important, to point out that that is not representative, clearly, of every single person of the Islamic faith. But there is a disconnect when people are saying, look, Islam is a very, very peaceful religion, full stop, and you cannot question that at all, when you have the point that you've made, that there are many Islamic countries that are extremely violent to members of their own community in the name of Islam in those countries. And as you might have heard me saying at the start of the show, it makes it really difficult to then say, well, hang on the one hand, we're told that there's no problem at all from the Islamic community, and that it's very, very important that we don't tar everyone with the same brush, something I agree with wholeheartedly, when you have countries that have the doctrine of Islam as their main political doctrine, their main way of life, that are horrific towards gay people, horrific towards women. And I think that until that's called out in a reasoned and rational and responsible way, as you have, I think that we're going to have a problem, and you're going to have people then from the far right, as you've pointed out, saying, well, there you go, look, it's all Muslims that are responsible. When in actual fact, you can call out that happens in those countries. You can call out our hypocrisy as a nation trading with many of those countries as well, without tarring every single person in the West who has an Islamic faith with the same brush.
Yeah, I think what essentially you're saying is that the conversation needs to be accurate and responsible. But I think that that has to be on both sides. So whether you're criticizing Islam, you need to be accurate and responsible. Yeah. And whether you're criticizing the prevalence, a normative stance of Islamic homophobia within the Muslim community, again, you have to be accurate and responsible, which is why the piece uses a lot of data from polls that have been taken in the UK or international polls like Pew Research 2013. But similarly, as somebody who's critiquing that stance of disgust and deplorability of gay people, I'm responsible in my criticism of that. I'm accurate in my criticism of that. I think people like Sam also have to be very accurate and responsible with their language. So if Sam is throwing words like racism around when I'm Pakistani and I'm actually talking about my own community, like I think that isn't a particularly responsible way to respond to.
Well, it shuts down debate. It's a deliberate means to shut down reasoned debate about these things. And I think that your article raises a really good point in both the political left in doing that, but also in the media in doing that, and sort of the eggshells that I think some people in the media tread on. They'd rather not go near it than for fear of being accused of those things. And that means that the things you've pointed out in your article go completely unchallenged. Look, we're going to take a quick break, Jimmy, because we're a bit running over, and then we'll come back if that's all right, if you don't mind holding on through the break. So I've got a few more things that I want to ask you about, more especially exactly what reaction you've got from people to this article, and then we'll get to some of your calls on this coming up late night here on Talk Radio.